Oh, there.
I'll never get used to that.
It's a very interesting voice.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, if he disconnects again, I'll probably just leave it and try and figure it out later.
So the book that we should actually be reading soon is this one, the Wordsworth one. And one thing I did realize about this is really, it's pretty small print, and in a lot of the other versions, there's a lot more pages in the readings than book.
You might need to turn off your visual again, Chase, because you're stuttering again.
There we go.
Okay, I'm back.
Right, you want
I
to
don't
give
know how
another
much you guys
shot?
got of that.
Very little.
You said that there are fewer pages in other editions, or more pages or something.
More pages, yeah. The book we're going to be reading is very small print. Oh, not very small, but small print, and it's quite densely packed. So we're going to be reading quite a bit this semester. Hope you guys like Kafka.
Have you ever watched The Prisoner, the old TV show The Prisoner?
No.
You should check that out. This book, I mean, I had read a little bit of Kafka, but, well, since you guys haven't watched it, I won't say much, but The Prisoner is very much like Kafka. It just reads like, like there's just these people just kind of show up out of nowhere and do weird stuff and disappear. And what this actually reminded me of is the way my dreams work.
Oh, yeah.
Except in dreams, I don't notice that it's weird. But, the way these people show up, and then all of a sudden they're somebody else. Or they, all of a sudden these people have badges and they didn't have badges before. Or, it's very, I guess it's supposed to be, but it's very dream/night. I mean, nightmare maybe is too strong a word, but it sort of disjointed feel that it has to me feels a lot like a dream.
Yeah, it's really the standard anxiety dream, which is probably like 90% of my dreams personally. It's basically the feeling of discomfort because everything is shifting and you can't really get some kind of a stable referent in your environment. You just kind of react to what's going on, but what's going on is constantly shifting and you're trying to constantly readjust to that shifting. And that's the basic dream logic of it all. But along with that, there's usually this idea of it's about kind of the way that we're subjected to our own kind of self-judgment. I think it comes into play in a lot of our dreams. There's like a fear about how other people will see us. And it's pretty interesting because you're basically, in a world of your own creation to some extent, or a large extent probably. But yet a lot of these things that are manifest in your dreams are kind of partial object people that are kind of like these projections of how you see people, but then it's all about how these people see you in your own mind. So there's this interesting kind of reflective quality to all these things that are nevertheless kind of some aspect of your own sense of self-image. And I think Kafka is basically, he's really grasped this kind of interior dream logic in a sense, and the way that you can also get kind of like just totally wrapped up into it. And he does it without Well, of course, I mean, in some of his other like Metamorphosis, that's more kind of explicitly kind of surrealistic, with a bug. But in this stuff, it doesn't seem like totally supernatural necessarily. It's like, oh, okay, people arresting him and stuff, but he gets you to kind of like go along with it in a very interesting way. But yet, it's still surreal and doesn't make sense. Kind of like our dreams, we get just wrapped up in them.
You actually really brought up like a really good one of my favorite parts of the story. Two of my favorite parts of the story that you got me thinking about earlier today and now here again. And it's exactly like on what you're talking about with like elements of our dreams can be these sort of reflections of a social dimension of our experience. Like at a social register of experience, it's kind of manifesting itself, or our reflections on that social register kind of manifesting itself. And I don't mean to bring him up so fast, but Lacan says that talks about at least in the brief bit I watched a thing called like the clinical Lacan. It was about this idea that sometimes the unconscious makes itself into a reality, and there are three big ways that it does that, and that's dreams, and it apparently slips of the tongue, you think, but apparently it goes on further into sexual reality as this real expression of the unconscious, or the things of which we are unconscious. And according to Lacan further, the unconscious itself has this character to it, this texture of being transpersonal, or in other words, structured like a language. Meaning, I guess to me, like what I've gained from the thoughts I've had about it is such that a lot of our deepest thoughts and our most internal personal feelings and ideas come from a place that demands some invisible observer looking at us, or it's always relative to what somebody would think. It's always based on some standard, or it's always I'm this sort of person, but it's never just this purely internal impulse for me of like I don't have a sense for anything where I'm like, that's justice, no matter what. No matter who says it, no matter what anybody tells me, that's what's right in the world. Or like, that this is how sexuality ought to be, or this is how blank, or whatever. There's just this social dimension to the most internal, personal little interactions I have with myself when I'm in my neurotic thought spirals. And I think it's really well illustrated in the particular part. And I want to reference the two parts that I wanted to talk about. But in the Mitchell reading, in the Mitchell translation, I'm looking at the PDF, and I went to page 32, which is 69 of 228. Like the PDF file says that it's at page 69, but in the book, the page number on the top left corner is 32, and it's when he says that he's talking to that little fat man, that guy he describes as a short fat man at a desk, and there's the people on the right side of the hall that he can't see. He has no idea who they are, or how many people they are, or what they think. But the man starts speaking to him and says, "You should have been here an hour and 5 minutes ago." And then all these people in the hall start cheering and applauding, and then Yosef is like, "Oh, okay, I guess I have to respond." And he says, he resolves to observe more than to speak. He says, "Perhaps I arrived late, but now I'm here." And this was followed by a round of applause, again from the right-hand side of the hall. They're easily won over, Kay thought. The only thing that bothered him was the silence from the left-hand side, which was immediately behind him and from which only isolated applause had come. He wondered what he could say to win them all over at once, or if that should prove impossible, to get the others on his side at least some of the time. And I think that that's just like it's a dream going on. It's like I'm experiencing this thing, this abstract idea that is being embodied in this and experienced just as heavily in this one particular like moment, in this particular example, where it's like I spend a lot of my time trying to worry about pleasing people, or about maybe if I can't please everybody, I'll just get most of them on my side. I don't know. You know, there's like this deep sense of care in the individual towards, you know, how people perceive them and the approval of others, you know, and the functionality of that approval in dire moments, like when he's sitting there talking about. If I were Yosef, I would think, God, if I can get everybody clapping for me, who knows what'll happen? I don't know. Maybe something will change. Maybe they'll hail me as their king or something. Whatever. It's just insane, and there's no telling what's going to happen. But he's just got this sense, this kind of brash sense that like he needs to win them over, and that's with everybody. He wants to be amicable with everybody, and he's just God. I mean, he's kind of rude to those guards when he calls them stupid, but or at least when he thinks them stupid. But he tries to be nice to the supervisor and stuff, you know. But,
it seems to me like it's interesting that he almost like ignores the authority figure every time and just tries to get everyone else on his side. It seems like, you know, it's like because the first inspector was the one who told him like, you're just talking a lot and that's just like not going to help you out. And then in this inquiry under the new guy, he's like just going on and having this huge speech and not letting, you know, the guy end up saying a word, you know, trying to get all these other people on his side, you know, and he's constantly talking about these people around him who respect him and who he can always rely on, and that these people are wrong, you know, but he's really kind of refusing to listen to these people because of how absurd the situation is. Like he wants to just win over everyone else and then destroy this organization or something, but, you know, and just the way he like gains momentum in a sense and is really like, oh, I'm winning them over, this beautiful speech, and then it ends and it's just like, well, what was that? Like, what are you know, the guy was like, you know, this isn't going to help you at all, you know. It's like I just find that really interesting, his focus on like the only people who seem like they can't handle the situation and they don't want to like be a part of it because they don't know what it is and they don't want to deal with it, and they're afraid of being in his position, are the people he's trying to win over. And so they're just like, we can't help you, you know.
Yeah, I think so, as well as the whole kind of like inner subjective constitution of the individual that Hunter is kind of pointing at, it's pretty interesting, is the whole idea here of a kind of performance that goes on. It's a theme really throughout the whole book. And I mean, you know, that first hearing when he goes in and people are clapping and stuff, and it's very much theatrical. And at the first chapter, when he's arrested and whatnot, he has an audience like looking at him through the window. And in the translation that I read, Breon Mitchell's translation, he refers to it as an audience. And the whole thing has they make several references to the theater. And when he's talking to Fräulein Bürstner, when she comes back, well, where was she before? She was at the theater. She comes back and he puts on a performance where he stages, you know, this whole thing. Yeah. So I think this really is very significant in the sense that not only is it like a kind of dream in the sense that, you know, what is basically going on there? It's basically like a stage performance by yourself of all these different roles of yourself. It's kind of like this, you know, schizophrenic multiplication of yourself according to these kind of different articulations of the, you know, the inner subjective psyche or whatnot. And then they kind of play with each other in this kind of forgetfulness of that it's a performance, essentially. And I think a lot of what is going on here that is hinted at. So I've read the whole book just to get ahead. But basically, I think a lot of what's going on here is that it's kind of like the key to this is what he talks about at the very beginning. Like, he could have not taken it so seriously. He could have ignored the seriousness of these people. Instead, he took himself too seriously. His role as Yosef K, and it all kind of stems from there. And in the same way, he's kind of complicit in a lot of these things because he takes them so seriously. And I think at the very beginning, if he had simply just laughed at those people's faces like he was considering, then yeah, the story could have just ended there because it would have worked. He has to be complicit in all these things in a very significant way. Basically, once you expose it as the theatrical performance that it is, then it kind of loses power. In the same way, he's constantly told, like, you're taking this too seriously. He's told that by the women, that is. The men, so the court officials try to get him, like, take this seriously. Don't ignore this. And I think that's significant as well, but maybe we can get into that later on.
It also seems like he doesn't, like at least with his conversation with Fraulein, that, like, he doesn't really listen. Fraulein. He doesn't really listen to her at all, you know? I mean, in a sense, I don't think he's really listening to anyone very well, but it's just like, it seems like, you know, his preconceptions of what he thinks she will think are all that he can kind of understand or comprehend, you know, like with the captain banging on the door, and he's like, oh, of course she would be worried that the captain would think that there's something going on here or something, but don't worry, you know, like, I could figure it out. I can make it, you know, I can talk to the landlady, I can get it all figured out. But really, she was just kind of like, just uncomfortable. Like, it just was a weird, strange experience for her. And, you know, and then obviously, like, the kiss at the end, and, like, him coming out from it being like, I felt really good about it, but I felt like I should have felt better about it than I did, even though I felt good. Like, I don't really know what to think of that at this point, but I do think he has, like, a strange relationship with women, and I think that they will probably continue to kind of fulfill a certain role in his eyes.
And, like, I think that things like that interaction between Fräulein and him, where he kisses her all over the place. He's just like almost like an animal lapping up water. I was disgusted while I was reading that.
I loved it personally.
I felt like, yeah, I was genuinely, I was shocked that it was happening, but I feel like that's why I think that the solution, or if we can say that there's a solution, I think that Kafka's pointing to a problem, right? And this problem is that there are these institutions and there are these theatrical elements to life that go on, right? But I think that the problem is more complex than we give it credit for, and like right away. I think that it's not. I think it wouldn't be enough to point to the theatrics, to reveal under the sheet how theatrical everything is, because I feel like it's moments like those where structures of power find their footing, find their real stability in weird, obscene moments of ironic distance, like in Full Metal Jacket when they're you know, don't take it so seriously. You know, if you take it too seriously, you're going to get too close to the demands of this superego, this institution or whatever. Like Yosef can't take it too seriously, or he's going to get too close to the desires of this superego thing, and he's going to self-destruct, I think. Like in Full Metal Jacket, when that one guy domes himself in the bathroom. And I think that the problem, though, is that, like, this ironic distance that keeps people from reaching that horrible point, I think that's often utilized and weaponized and made into this kind of effective force for sustaining the efficiency of existing structures, and it's like a certain level of obscenity that you include within the regime in order to make it function. If you're in the army and there's a law that says no drinking when you're in the army, right? And then come Saturday, your buddies in the platoon say, "Why aren't you coming drinking? Why don't you come drinking? You're not a real comrade. You're not a real ally. Do you not care about your brothers in arms?" And you get in trouble for not drinking. You know, there's some degree of ironic distance and obscenity and refusal of the explicit laws and rules that make a system function, that make especially an ideology function or a power structure like this, just this banal evil that he's constantly being confronted with, where every time he raises his voice, the guards quiver in fear, and so he can't attack them. They don't know anything, and they're just sort of scared. They're just scared of him, like they don't know, and yeah, if he gets too close, it's dangerous. But I think that the distance is not enough, and I don't necessarily know what the solution is, if there is a solution. But I think that him like tackling this woman in their hostel or whatever it is they live and kissing her, I think that was an example of like this obscene, I don't care, I'm not going to take it seriously, I'm going to throw caution to the wind sort of attitude. And it's completely unproductive and like, I would say obscene presentation.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about that scene when you have the kissing assault is that he's essentially, he's presumably innocent of all these things, and that's what he says. Surely he couldn't. I can't think of anything why I'd, be in trouble or whatnot. But then you see, and he kind of does this throughout the book, but basically he has this self-image ultimately that he's innocent of truly anything that's really actually bad. Sure, maybe like some minor things or whatnot, but then he constantly does things that are essentially hypocritical, and that you can easily see as, oh, well, maybe that's why you're in trouble to some degree or whatnot. Is basically what he does is he like sexually assaults her. But then earlier, so he basically says, like, you can tell the landlady that I assaulted you, and it doesn't matter because we're such good buddies that it doesn't matter, so it's all good. And then he basically does it. So I think there's a kind of hypocritical attitude where he can't see his own actions almost to a certain degree. It's almost like he has this self-image where he's this, pristine, successful financial officer of this bank, and he can't basically put these kind of like animalistic, transgressive actions into his self-image. And there's something like that's truly almost kind of like projected out or unconscious to him, and because of that, he doesn't know what he's doing or who he is to a certain degree. He's doing these things, and then a few minutes later, he's basically saying something completely counter to that. But he does this throughout the novel, and so there's a reading basically that he really is just totally innocent, and it's about this improper guilt or whatnot. I think it's a little more complex than that, because he's constantly in this gray area of basically, in a sense, kind of incriminating himself by his actions, and then also incriminating himself by his kind of hypocritical attitude about his own actions. And there's a lot more dimensions on top of that, I think. But yeah, that's the way I kind of read that.
One of the sources of anxiety for me in this, and maybe this says more about me than it does about Kafka or the novel, but is his, and you guys have hit on elements of this already, but has to do with his power and his social authority. And he seems to be very concerned that everyone recognized that he is an important person, and that he is a he's a, I don't know what the correct term would be, not aristocrat, I guess, at this time, but that, he's a well-to-do person, and he's an important person in society. He's an important person in the bank. And he seems really concerned that people acknowledge this. But then at the same time, and I don't know if I've so far, maybe later in the story, if I've got any indication that he's aware of this, at least consciously, but that his ability to maintain that role is dependent on people acknowledging that he has that role. That sort of Hegelian recognition thing, and to make Hunter smile. but the fact, so here's, the anxiety I kind of feel throughout here is that basically someone's going to call his bluff at some point and say, why do you think you're such a special person? I mean, so you're a guy in the bank, so who cares? Or if one of the guys in the bank that's inviting him to these parties and stuff just says, who are you? I mean, in this sort of story, random shit can happen at any time. And, so his boss could turn to him and go, you work here? After having just invited him to some social gathering. So that's the kind of anxiety that, the story is so volatile, because of this sort of dream quality. You never know what's going to happen next. And what that means is the basis of his own social security is always at risk. And I'm reminded when I was, many, many years ago, we were in this church, and I stupidly volunteered to be a Sunday school teacher for a group of elementary kids, and one of them was.
I would have loved to have been in your Sunday school class.
Well, yeah, I was not a good Sunday school teacher. I said unorthodox things, but when this kid was acting out somewhere, and I said, well, I can't remember what I said, but it's like, you need to behave, and he's like, yeah, what are you going to do if I don't? And I was like, I can't do a damn thing. I'm in a church. I mean, it's not like I can curse at the guy or hit him, or I can't throw him out of Sunday school. And so, the fact that I had authority depended on this kind of illusion that all the other kids were buying into, that I had authority. And, I feel that way in the classroom sometimes too, when I'm up there and I'm the philosophy professor, I'm lecturing. And I always feel like I'm a hair's breadth away from someone like one of you assholes asking me some question like, I don't know. But so anyway, that's kind of this anxiety I get here, is that he's, he really wants to, he has this position of social standing and social security, but because of the dreamlike quality of the environment, it's always like on the, what I feel, it's like always on the ragged edge of being disrupted. So that's where some of my anxiety comes from reading this.
Yeah, I agree. I was actually talking to Hunter the other day about feeling kind of like an imposter, just like constantly feeling like I'm fooling everyone into thinking I have good ideas, or that the things I'm thinking mean something, and really I'm not. I'm just saying shit, and it's just working somehow, and that's
we
the
all
feeling
are.
yeah, exactly. And and that's something that I think is really important for me. Like, if I have a friend or someone close to me, to recognize, is that, like, I have this very kind of innate feeling that, like, everyone feels that way to some extent. Everyone's kind of an imposter on some level. And we all have to just kind of convince ourselves to keep moving, and convince ourselves that we're are worthwhile people, and that's how we get things done, and that's how we, you know, in a way, kind of prove ourselves to ourselves. But yeah, I just get this sense, you know, especially from this character, that, like, you know, the only the only reason he's like wanting to believe that he has this role, or trying to confirm that this role is something real, is because it's being put into question. You know, it's like I have this very, I'm just thinking about what happened, you know, before this morning, right, in his life, and had he ever exercised his power in that way? Has he ever, you know, interacted with Frowling in that same way? Or is it the fact that someone might take it away that is forcing him to exercise it? You know, is kind of making this expectation on himself to be like, can I do these things? I have to know, I have to try, you know, and so that gives me this feeling that it's like, you know, like, if he didn't question it himself, then it wouldn't be a problem. But, you know, it's like, as soon as someone else puts it into question, he knows in himself that that role isn't real, you know, that it's just the symbolic role that's forced to be acknowledged by others. And that insecurity of that role is just so obvious in everything that he's doing, you know. But would that insecurity exist if nobody else put it into question? You know, it's like, I feel like up until this point, he really was fulfilling that role, and everyone thought of him that way. But as soon as someone with who isn't a part of his life questions that, then it just kind of all fell apart for him. And then he's, you know, kind of trying to convince all the people in his life who he thought saw him in this role that he has this role, you know.
I see. So it's like a kind of like a house of cards of his own identity to a certain degree.
So
I was thinking about putting two of these thoughts together. In one sense, our thoughts are never our own, and we're always at the mercy of others. But I think there's a joke underlying all of this, and that before any of that can be brought to bear against us, we already implicated ourselves. So does that make sense? Like, we're being judged by others, but before any pronouncement or verdict is delivered, we've already short-circuited it by judging ourselves and acting out our own condemnations of ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's almost like, in order to construct an identity itself to begin with, we almost need those judgments to be internalized to some degree by ourselves. And it's this kind of like this constant process where we're kind of internalizing these judgments of other people in this kind of feedback loop. And then, you know, we internalize this, we act a certain way based off that, and then other people in another kind of feedback loop kind of bounce off of that and make more determinations about us. And it's just kind of like this never-ending thing where there's constant judgments, both of ourself and of others, to the point where they get blurred together in a kind of way where we can't really have this identity unless we are essentially internalizing these judgments of other people. But I think there's also some degree where, you know, this whole I definitely like the idea of, you know, this power structure being tied with an identity formation, and that this is a very important part of what is ultimately kind of like crumbling in this book. And I think it kind of one thing I was just thinking about is, you know, it's almost like the power that is exercised on a kind of, you know, somewhat like a hidden basis, basically like the perks of some kind of a power position. It's like if you don't actually carry them out, then it's almost like you feel then like an imposter to some degree. And I think maybe that's kind of what he's doing in a sense with that woman. And you know, with all this stuff, well, it seems to have kind of quieted down, I guess. But you know, there's the whole thing where all these men in these positions of power were sexually assaulting all these women, and it was, you know, all over the news and stuff. And it seems like that is something somewhat similar to what's going on here, in the sense that they had all these positions of power over people, and it's almost like if they didn't take advantage of it, then it was like they were imposters, that it wasn't real. So to make the position of power and that identity that goes along with that power real to themselves, they had to actually do things that were specific to the exercise of that power, and that's how they did it. And I think that kind of structure, where you have basically like a self-identity, some kind of image of self-identity, mixed with a power structure, and all these, you know, intersubjective relations with people in society, that what he's kind of constructing here is almost like this net of relations that compose this person's identity, and showing that, you know, it is something that's always, we're not some self-enclosed ego, not some Cartesian subject, that there's always the whole realm of the social and everything else is always kind of in a way kind of compacted into any one part of it, including, you know, the single individual. There's always some kind of mediation going on there that brings in all society. So got a little distracted there. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just and just to add on a little bit, I get the feeling that the officials, and in my eyes, kind of recognize that they're kind of imposters on some level, like the guards and the inspector. They're kind of like, you know, they're kind of like, yeah, this is ridiculous. You know, it's like this is ridiculous what we're doing, but it's just the way things are. You know, it's like, don't get too upset or anything. Let's just go through it. It's like I don't know what's going on. You know, it's like I don't have any power. I don't know what's happening. You know, and so they seem kind of very accepting of the way things are, trying to work within it, and really even trying maybe even to help this guy, but it's just like impossible for them to, because he is trying so hard to prove himself to them, and they can't even prove themselves to themselves. So it's like, why are you doing this?
Yeah, it's kind of like you know, all the roles that the people play, they're all these limited roles, and everyone's like, what, you expect me to do something about it? I'm just, you know, blank. I'm this role. You know, people real depth to any every person. Can you guys hear me now? How much
Yeah,
did
we can hear
that
you
cut
now.
off?
Pretty much all of it.
Oh god. Okay, so anyways, so basically these people, all these roles that people play, they very much like to specify that they're limited in these roles, that, you know, all they are is this role, and because of that they can't do anything about it. There's no one role that's actually present here that is able to discern what is going on or to do anything about what's going on. Everyone lacks some kind of really discernible amount of knowledge about what's going on, and also any kind of discernible degree of power about what's going on. I mean, there's kind of like hints of where this power could be to know what's going on, to change the this case of K's, but ultimately it's not there. And I think this is also, to a certain degree, kind of it's not only something about like the identity, I think, of the way that, you know, because our identity is kind of constructed in this way where it calls into like the whole chain of social forces, and because of that it's always something that seems to like it's impossible for us to really change ourselves, because we'd have to first change other people's perceptions of us or whatnot, and it goes along with the whole kind of direction, and that's kind of the sense of powerlessness that's going on there with his image kind of falling apart. Is that no matter what, his own position that he thought was so important can't help. This other person's position can't help. That person's position can't help. None of these people can do anything or know what's going on. And I think it's so to go into like a kind of a Lacanian kind of thing, you'd say basically this is kind of like the structure of language in a sense, where one word has meaning, by its deference to other words. It's a system of language, and that's why any one word doesn't have some kind of stable one-to-one, referent. It's always the system dispersed as a whole that really has the power there. And any one person, can't really change language. Maybe James Joyce did, but yeah. And I think it's something like that too, that this person is trying to change themselves, maybe their role. They're trying to bring back this sense of stable identity they had, and they just simply can't, because what is that stable identity but something constructed by those other people and in concert with them? And it's kind of like an inherent paradox or contradiction there that he can't get over.
I mean, an interesting aspect of that, though, is So I read a little, just the beginning of the next chapter, and it seems as though a lot of people are sort of in agreement with him that he is an important person, that a lot of the proceedings that are coming against him are kind of silly, that the ways that individuals and the system overall is treating him is bad, and then yet, like, nothing, like it doesn't seem as though it's an issue of recognition. I think that might be part of his problem. Like, he views himself and his own existence as a product of recognition. And so then the way that he's going about trying to deal with the problem that's coming from, these people arresting him and, attempting to, interrogate him at a hearing or whatever, is he's attempting to convince other people to perceive the situation in the same way that he does, in the same way that he is approaching the problem his own self. And the problem that he keeps running into is a lot of them agree with him. A lot of, right, regardless of like the specifics of, all of the people at the hearing had badges, and so maybe they were a part of it, maybe they weren't. Like, again and again, people like clap for him. People agree with what he's saying. People like agree that he is, such and such a person, and this and that. And then nothing like changes because of that, because it doesn't seem like the systemic issue here has anything to do with recognition or perception, in the way that we might traditionally think that it does.
When you were talking, that made me think of this passage on page 37 on the Mitchell translation.
Did we all do the Mitchell translation? Just
by the way, there's two Mitchell translations. There's
okay.
two translators whose last name is Mitchell.
So this is only about three, and this one is about 3 pages from the very end of the story. No, actually, 4 pages from the very end. And he says, he's been talking, he says, silence immediately fell. Such was Kay's control over the meeting. So he has this sense of control. But then in the next paragraph, he says, there is no doubt that there's a large organization at work behind this court's every operation, in my case, the arrest and today's examination. So, like Sean was saying, he seems to have some mastery of the situation here, and that the people, at least some of the people, are willing to acknowledge him. But then, there's this faceless organization, this cabal or something that seems to be bent on persecuting him. Almost at the very end, you know, he looks at all these people, and they all have these badges, and like suddenly they've all been converted into part of that power structure that's oppressing him. And so I don't know, I guess I don't really have any positive thing here to say. It's just more of there's an interesting tension here, you know, that Sean seems to have brought up as to what degree does he actually exert some sort of personal influence, or does he have control of his identity and the way people perceive him, and to what degree does he not? And then there seems to be the part of the reason he does not is because there's this hidden occult force, social force, that is working against him in some way, and I guess working to also convert these people. Was it last night or night before last? I can't remember. My family and I were watching A Knight's Tale. You guys remember that from it's like now 20 years ago.
Oh, with Heath Ledger?
Yeah, Heath Ledger. Yeah. And it's just a fun story, you know, with totally anachronistic features. But there's a place where, you know, he's been arrested and he's in stocks, and people are throwing vegetables at him, and his friends are coming to his aid, and they're throwing vegetables. You know, it's all the, you know, the hoi polloi or you know, cursing him and all that. And then the crown prince comes in, who he's had some interaction with. He goes, actually, this is a very noble man. And he lets him out of the stocks, and he says, and he knights the guy. And then all of a sudden the crowd is like, woohoo, you know, this is a great guy. He's a knight now, and we love him. And, you know, my daughter was making a comment about how fickle the people are. And there's something similar, you know, all these people are on his side, and then he's got all this control. And then all of a sudden, all these people have badges, you know, and they're part of this secret oppressive organization. So I don't really know what's going on there, but it seems like, you know, like Sean's made me think about, to what degree does he have control over his identity, and does he have real power, and then to what degree is it being subverted by something he doesn't ever quite understand?
Sean, are you playing video games?
Yeah. I'm a very fiddly person.
I condemn you.
So now I have to go to my own hearing, where they will.
Yeah.
Surely.
Well, eventually, you never actually get to the hearing.
Okay, it's
We'll get to you eventually.
2084 or something like that. Will I be alive? Like statistically, I don't know. I'll have to do the math for it.
We're just gonna say bad things about you, so you'll never get a job.
Oh. That's pretty bad, actually. But yeah, I just do this because it helps me focus. I play like a really mindless game in the background that I don't actually have to pay attention to, and it keeps my hands busy. So sorry if it's distracting. I can try to like move it out of frame.
No, it's not. I was just joking. Yeah.
No, I get that. I'm the same way. But I was just gonna say that actually what Sean said earlier made me think. You know, it's like, what does Joseph K. want? You know, it's like, it seems like he is getting acknowledged. Like it really does seem like these people are acknowledging him. It's like, it's almost like if nobody acknowledged him, but all this trial stuff stopped, would he be happy? Is that all he wants? You know, it's like, and then what does the trial kind of represent in his eyes beyond just wanting to be acknowledged? You know, because it seems like he's getting acknowledgement. He knows he has people who trust him and care about him and think that his situation is weird. But still, at the end of the day, it's still happening, you know? And so at the end of the day, he wants to not be accused, you know? He wants this trial not to happen, you know, which to me seems like it's kind of this very superficial representation of a much bigger problem. And the fact that he's so focused on the trial and the actual aspects of it, and completely ignoring kind of like what he's trying to do beyond that, you know, it's like none of the things he's doing are working, because he's like trying to get acknowledgement, and he's trying to do all these different things, but at the end of the day, it seems like what he really wants is just for the trial to be over, for this problem to disappear. and he thinks that doing all these other things might accomplish that. But when they don't, he just gets like shocked. He's just like, "What? This should fix it."
Yeah, then there's the whole kind of ambiguity over, what this means for him, which I think a lot of that is he's trying to work out those things himself, and to the point of, so I like the part where he's surprised that they let him go to the bank. They let him go to work. So, well, aren't I under arrest? Well, yeah, but you can still go to work. Well, what's the point of arresting me then? I don't know. You're just under arrest. We'll get back to you eventually. And that reminds me a lot of Deleuze's idea of the control society, where
bring that up, the postscript on societies of control, like that section made me think of it so much.
Oh yeah, definitely. Fair enough. So a lot of people have pointed So a lot of people pointed out that Kafka seems to have some degree kind of realized some of the implications of the digital age to some degree. This idea of this kind of dispersed network, and that's what Deleuze was talking about in the postscripts on the societies of control. So the whole idea is basically, Foucault has the idea of societies of discipline, where basically control is exerted by controlling bodies' movement in space and time into different enclosures. So that, you go to the factory, and under this building, this enclosure of the factory, you're controlled by, being watched in your labor and whatnot. And then after you clock out, you're totally independent then from the factory. You go and do your own thing. You go to the bar or whatever, and you're totally free from the factory. You're good. You can go live your own life in something separate. But now, with the society of control, it's much more dispersed. There's never really a clean break from the factory, because it's not the factory. It's now your vocation. And, with email, you can be emailed at any time. You have to be constantly on call. And, what they say, you're a representative of this company, even when you're not here. So your conduct has to be exemplary, because, you represent this fine company here. We all do. And that kind of disbursement of power through, no real clear separation or enclosure. And in a sense, it's kind of power becomes internalized in those cases. So it's basically, you have to actually change your own interior identity to correspond with, I'm a tech employee or whatever. And then if people see like, oh, he's not really motivated to be here, he doesn't really know what it means to be a part of this company, then that whole thing, it's really a case where power is so dispersed and so kind of ephemeral that it cannot be pointed to in any one sense. It's constantly something that kind of hovers over us, like the internet. And that there's a lot of this going on here, in the sense that, okay, he's under arrest, but what does that mean? Oh, well, you can still go do whatever you want, but, we'll eventually get back to you. There's no finality there. And I think a lot of that is he's kind of picking up on that sense of power or control or whatnot that isn't some kind of clear and distinct thing like, 94. It's very clear, when power is being exerted. You have these jackboot thugs, and they go and you commit violence against people. Where in something like Kafka, it's much more subtle, in the sense that it's something constantly hanging over him that exerts its influence without actually having some kind of like physical, local stimulation in a sense. And I think that's what's really interesting about it, is it's showing something much more subtle about power and how it uses, identity and all these other things to kind of exert itself.
If I could kind of try to add on to that. I think there were a couple things that you pointed out, like you said about this, like the story itself is kind of focused in this area, or has spent some time here dealing with, I guess spends the entirety of the story dealing with the interaction, the friction between humanity and authoritative structures of power in an institution, or a faceless government agency or something. Like, I get, yeah. But I think a couple things stood out to me that I think if we might be able to get a little bit more specific about that relationship. I mean, at least this is just an understanding that I'm kind of piecing together as we're talking, and it's just kind of this. It's not like an idea that I have. It's just something that's kind of happening in front of me in a way. And I guess I would say that I think that we're like Sean, you like really pointed out something like very important and very interesting with the relationship between the actions of the people involved and this apparent recognition and sympathy and understanding that Kay is getting from his surroundings, from his contemporaries and the people around him, from the subjects around him, and basically, I would say that there's something here that's being talked about, and it's this. I know it's like almost cliche to say, but it's like a universality, in the sense that there are these people in these positions, like the guards at the very beginning. Yeah, at the very beginning of the story, they have these two guys come into the apartment, and Kay's talking to them, and let's say that there's some like, oh, we're the authorities and you need to do this, and he's kind of bowing down to them. But then they share some tender moment, like, oh, can't you see it in your heart to sympathize with me as your fellow man, or whatever? And they say, yes, my dear friend, this will all be over, I swear to you, whatever. They show him some moment of, let's call it, authentic sympathy or whatever. I guess I would very much in this situation liken that to sort of like a Buddhist approach to universal love. Like, we are all people, we are all human beings. This is not a knock on Buddhism. I have a lot of respect. I've been doing a lot of reading on, or not reading, but listening to lectures on Buddhism. So I've gotten a lot closer to like secular Buddhism as like a really interesting and good set of ideas. But there's one area that I think I disagree with sometimes. It's not all of Buddhism, but some practitioners of Buddhism are proponents of this idea of universal love, of this like, we are all just people caring about people. And it's like the idea about those human libraries where you sit down and you talk to somebody and they tell you about their experience, and that line you hear about like, oh, an enemy is just a person whose story you haven't heard yet. And it's like that approach towards this, like, let's all just be Descartesian cognitos, and let's just chill out. Let's trip out together about like being human. I don't think it's a sustainable and a force for emancipation. It's a fun idea and it's good to live, but I don't think it's a sustainable force for emancipation. I think Sean like just hit a homer on it. I think it's like obvious now that I'm like look at, because like I think that, okay, bear with me here. I think that when we exist in Kafka world where everything's horrible and there's like this oppressive state on top of us all the time, we have an access to the universal in a way. And it's the same way we do in capitalism, where it's like everything you do, every part of your life, the things you own, the places you go, the work you do in your life's work, it's all alienated from you in the sense that it's contingent now. It's oh yeah, I'm a bank guy, and oh well, thank God I'm a supervisor. Otherwise, they might not respect me as a person, and or like oh, I could quit that, and then I could throw caution to the wind, or whatever. And like, we are not these things we own, and we're not the jobs we do, and we can change in a heartbeat if the situation requires it. If somebody you love begs you and tells you that you have to change and we have to escape and run away to the other side of the world, it's like, okay, I guess I can, because I'm not connected to anything here. I'm here as this Cartesian cogito with this position of like a universality, you know, completely alienated from my particular dimensions or determinations of social ability or existence. To put it briefly, I think that Yosef's identity is kind of permanently distanced from everything he does, and it's focused, is hyper focused on the approval of the people around him, because he doesn't have any sort of guarantee or satisfaction from the symbolic edifice that he's put himself into. All he can do is look at the universals around him and say, don't you guys, hey, you know, I know that I might not be making any success in this place where I dedicate all my time, but at the end of the day, we're all people, right, fellas? And everybody's like, yeah, you know, hell yeah. And so he finds comfort, he finds identity, he finds recognition, he finds relief there. But I think that the only real problem I have, or that I think Kafka is really brilliantly illustrating here, is that there's no necessary link between having a universal love, or caring for your fellow man, or having like a deep spiritual experience that lets you see into the soul of people or whatever. There's no connection between an activity or an event like that, or a feeling like that, of universal love or whatever, and being a good or decent person to to people around you. And I know that it's like, that sounds super relativist or whatever, or open to the evils of relativism, but I think that when I say being a good or decent person, I guess I just mean kind of being an individual dedicated to an egalitarian society focused on unconditional liberty and emancipation. And because I guess I believe in freedom, and I think that there is a notion of freedom that's worth kind of looking at or fighting for. And I think that there's no necessary link between loving your fellow man and being super chill and tripping out about mankind, and having a warm and open heart to somebody's suffering. I don't think there's any link between that and actually fighting or working or struggling at all for emancipation or an egalitarian social order. Yeah. And
Well,
that's, yeah.
I was thinking maybe there's actually kind of like a similarity with your critique of, you know, this idea of like a universal love and brotherhood and all whatnot, and Nietzsche's critique of, you know, universal love as a kind of, you know, dilution of it. But then you start talking about egalitarianism, and yeah, Nietzsche wouldn't like that. So
specifically, Nietzsche would not like any kind of talk of egalitarianism.
Yeah, but then, well, see, I guess the whole one thing I guess I just picked up on, so to play devil's advocate, I guess it would be, you know, we're not all, you know, Cartesian cogitos, you know, that might be dreaming that, you know, there could be an evil genius, you know, probably is. So we're not all necessarily alike, but then egalitarianism would say basically there is some kind of inherent, maybe not equality, or some kind of value that leads to the sense that every person should be at least treated equally to some degree, or have some kind of equal amount of decency or human decency, maybe, that leads them to where we have a kind of ethical obligation to treat everyone in equal manner. So is there some kind of like a contradiction between, you know, maybe treating someone in that kind of universal love kind of thing, and then what is kind of like the inherent philosophy, I guess, of egalitarianism. Can those two work, or yeah?
Well, actually, I've been doing. It's crazy you ask. I've been thinking a lot about love, and kind of like the idea of love and where love fits into things, and what love kind of, you know. I think, and I think that there's a version of love that is this universal Buddhist love. But I think that when I say egalitarianism, I would argue, and this is where I kind of go off the rails and I become untrustworthy and delirious or something. But I do to some degree believe in the virtue of human existence just by its existing, and in the notion of egalitarianism, of some common core or piece of human being. Maybe it's because we all have fingers, or so, I don't know. There's something unifying us, and at the same time, I can say that, and I can exclude certain people, because there are certain people I don't want in my egalitarian universal society because I hate them, and I can say that because universals are always flawed, and the flaw in my universal is all the scumbags, and basically I know that sounds like but it's real. I basically I think that I think that universal love is a certain type of love that is similar to what I have seen in non-secular sects of Zen Buddhism. I'm talking to somebody a lot about Buddhism lately, about Zen Buddhism specifically, but we talked a lot about kind of like overcoming the false self, and connecting with people as these sort of infinite well springs of their self, which is like a person is a river and so on. And it basically just led to this Plato idea, this idea that I recognized in Plato, where Plato says that we need to love somebody like when you love a woman, or you love a man, or a human being, or a thing, or whatever, an activity. Plato says that you experience this love, and it starts off as a love for that thing. And then that love grows, and it becomes a love for the things about that thing, and the things about those things, and the nature of beauty as a whole. It becomes a love for beauty in general, and then it becomes a love for goodness at all. And the only way that Plato argues you can do that is by opening your heart to love, and experiencing kind of the full breadth of love and its chaotic sort of formalities. But I think that there are problems with this, and it's what I talked about. It's why it's like the whole that one book, I forget who it's by, but it's called Zen at War. It's about the World War II Japanese Zen Buddhist community during World War II, justifying the actions of imperialist Japan. And it's like there's no inherent connection between universal love and something else. I guess if we don't want to call it egalitarianism, I would call it something like a guarantee that you won't do horrible things. A guarantee, or even a trust that you won't do something horrible, like murder somebody who is innocent, or enslave somebody, or imprison somebody unjustly, or so on. You know what I mean? There's no necessary link between universal love and feeling good and recognizing your fellow man. Recognition. There's no guarantee between recognition and a lack of horrible activity. And I guess to kind of belabor things, because I have this whole thing I could go into for a really long time, but I'm not going to briefly make my point clear. I think that we don't need objective truth. That's my first thing I'm going to say. I'd say that if we're going to talk about Nietzsche and his approach towards egalitarianism, and the idea that each person has some sort of value or whatever, and he might disagree with that, I think that I'm with Nietzsche on one thing, and it's that I don't want objective truth. I'm not trying to say that there's a universal element to people, which is an unflappable, unconquerable, monolith of truth. That's this univocal thing. I think that we don't have objective truth, and we don't need it. I think that what we need or what I want, I guess, maybe not what everybody wants, is sort of like a social pact. I think that like a social pact might be as close as we could get. I'm having to balance a journal with my finger. Hold on. I think that this social pact should exist at the level, or it has to, if we want to have like a cohesive social order or a social edifice. It would be an agreement or a social pact at the level of not only the explicit rules, like the laws and the regulations of humanity or whatever, like some sort of John Rawls style set of liberal laws that we all kind of abide by with our multiple cultures or whatever. But at the level of the implicit, at the level of like, how do we deal with the rules that we are confronted with? What is the implicit understanding that we all have about each other as a community in some sense, as a civilization, as a society, as a group of people? And I think that while that, again, like seriously might sound like a pipe dream, this notion of a sort of global or universal communal social pact, I think that it's present in a sort of love that's not like universal love. That's my point. I think it's present in a sort of love that's not this Buddhist universal love. I think it's present, but only in the form of this like more Christian love called agape. It's not eros. I'm not talking about like erotic, like I want to kiss everybody kind of love. I mean like there's this sort of love for the collective that happens, and I think that this notion of agape, there is a problem with it, though, that I think we can get us back to Kafka and get me to shut up before I just go crazy. And it's that agape. The one problem that I'm trying to work through with agape, I'm really faithful in it, not faithful, but I'm hopeful for where it can lead me. With universality through the Holy Spirit and human rights and freedom and so on, and like opposing the social edifice. But there's a problem with it, and it's that agape too. I think this like Christian love for the collective is kind of appropriated by totalitarian regimes a lot of the time, and I think it's like it could almost be present here in Kafka, where what I mean is like who in history ever says like love for the collective? You know what I mean? Like who's talking about that? And it's from what I'm seeing, it's like Nazis and the DPRK and like the Soviet Union and stuff, and like projects that are wildly different from one another in terms of their political aims or ideological structures or edifices, but that retain this monopoly on power that can be called totalitarian. And what I mean is like, when something has a monopoly on power, only then can it universalize its mercy. And it can say like, you better be thankful that we're not coming in and messing you up, because we could, but we're not going to, because we care and we love you, and we have infinite love for you, and that's why we're not going to come destroy you. And we're only alive by the infinite power's mercy, and I think that's present. I think that's present a lot in Kafka, and that's where a lot of these people are coming from. Where this guy is like, look, I'm not trying to like bring you to trial. I'm just arresting you. I don't know anything. God, he's like bothered. He's like, get off of me. And I think it's a trick. I think it's like a devilish trick that he would make Yosef K feel like he's taking it too seriously. Like he's harshing this mellow that's going on for these guards. I think that only comes from this universal love perspective, which I disagree with, and then this appropriation of agape, which I also radically disagree with. And that's kind of where I'm at with like Yosef as like taking it too seriously. I think that he should, in a way. I'm kind of right now. I'm in the court of like, maybe he should take it seriously, but not as poorly handle it, and not handle it as poorly as he has.
So I have one request for clarification. So when you're talking about universal love, are your understanding of the thing, and that would permit, if I understand you correctly, harming another individual. I have a hard time putting those two together, because it would seem like if you had sort of universal compassion or care for others, that would prevent you from harming another. So,
well,
how do you see that?
Well, I mean, I think first off, I think it's just that I don't think that anybody who's preaching universal love is going to come and perform horrible acts of violence on you. I don't think that that's like a necessary link. I don't think everybody who likes the idea of universal goodness is a horrible sadist or murderer or tyrant or a person capable of evil. But I guess we're all capable of evil. Whatever. That's it. So I think that my thing is that not only is there no necessary link between this notion of universal love and refraining from horrible acts of violence or whatever, but also I think that this notion of universal love is used to excuse and even support horrible acts of violence sometimes. And I'll tell you in what sense. Like let's say that I'm a fundamentalist terrorist for a religious organization of some kind, like I'm an evangelical Christian, or I'm a radical fundamentalist of some sort of religious tribe or culture or group that believes in universal love, and then I'm given a mission, and that is I need to go kill somebody because I love them so much, and I want to save their sorry soul from eternal damnation by freeing them into the hands of my divine creator. You know what I mean? And I'll give you a real example. Like Sean knows what I'm talking about right away, so I'm gonna bore him and whoever else has heard this already. But the Buddhist community in Japan, D.T. Suzuki, Dunataro Suzuki or whatever, D.T. Suzuki, he was this really popular Buddhist guy for a long time, and he brought a lot of Zen practice to the West. And he was like a brilliant author. He was this incredibly brilliant Buddhist metaphysician and Zen theorist, and he wrote really interesting stuff. And I've watched a lot. I've talked to people who really, really, really respect what he had to say. And I guess as a result, I have respect what he has to say. But I know that he, D.T. Suzuki, participated in and was a member of the Zen Buddhist community in Japan in World War II. And this book that I forget the name of the author, this book called Zen at War, it talks about this, Zen mysticism, Zen theology and metaphysics and just Zen theory, Zen thought, was employed in the case of World War II Japan, where it was like for example, I'm a Japanese soldier moving through Nanking, and I have a sword, and I have to cut down a Chinese man in front of me. If I am connected to myself as this individual in the world of appearances, and I'm stuck on the false self, and I'm incapable of universal love, I'm incapable of universalizing myself, I'm all stuck here in the now and the here, I will be traumatized. I'll be like, oh my God, I'm slicing a man with a sword. I'll be totally wigged out. But if I commit to overcoming my false self, especially through military training, like achieving some sort of overcoming of my false self through military training, and reaching what I might call some universalist conclusion of my position relative to other subjects, wherein I can move across China as a soldier, and I can have, and from my perspective, it's no longer that I'm killing people. It's that I am just an observer of this cosmic dance, of this sword laying itself across the flesh and the bone of these other particular selves caught in samsara. And it's merely another step in the great eternal march toward our, I don't know, bodhisattva or our nirvana or whatever, our approach towards goodness and freedom and Zen. is only realizable if we recognize, if I position myself not as like a violent killer, but as almost like a parent disciplining the Chinese defenders, you know, for their actions against the will of the emperor, you know, or whatever I use to rationalize it. I have a universalized position where I have nothing but love and sympathy for you as my fellow man, and I would no sooner hug you, you know, and embrace you and listen to your problems and cry on your shoulder, and I would never forget you. I would never forget the moments that we share, and the way you change my perspective. And then I could plunge a sword into your stomach in the next like thought, you know, and just say, well, that was what happened to him. That's what was supposed to happen, because either God said it should, or because it's the wheel and I'm trying to break him out of it. You know, I just have this universal, unending love where my horrible acts of violence come from. You know what I'm saying? Does that kind of, I don't know, does that clear it up at all? Did I just ramble?
Yeah, I think in Tantra, it's even more explicit, where I think they would agree with you that this is in no way something moral, but okay, so the Buddhist realization of emptiness for Tantra, it includes basically intentionally transgressive acts in order to realize that emptiness. So, you know, Tantra, you would basically ritualistically commit all kinds of socially, you know, inexcusable acts. You would basically like have sex with a prostitute and eat meat and drink wine, murder people, whatever, eat dead bodies, basically anything you basically think of. And you do it in a way where you realize the inherent self-existent emptiness of it, and you get rid of the idea of a kind of aversion against that, you know, even awful things, in a way to just make that realization for yourself. So I think they would definitely not say that this is necessarily an act of love or whatnot. That's almost like a different exercise in a sense from the realization of emptiness. But I think they would say that the realization of emptiness is the most primordial realization. But then it's like the way of metta, of loving kindness, is something you kind of do in the world after that realization. At least from the Tibetan tantric perspective. But I'm thinking Nevid, he could probably give a good explanation maybe of the way that Zen would see that. I have read D.T. Suzuki somewhat, and I know that he was really bothered by the fact that people could use Zen techniques to, you know, propagate violence. And even, you know, this actually goes back to ancient times when they would use it for archery, and the samurais would use it. And so Jeff Kripal, who's a religious professor at Rice, he talks a lot about this false notion that religious experience, mystical experience, has basically anything to do with a kind of moral goodness, and shows over and over that most people's realizations of these things are in no way what we would consider ethical. That actually what we consider like the source of religion and whatnot is wildly outside of ethical bounds. And that's why, and I think that's why, you know, the tantric practitioners would agree with that. They would say, yeah, that's why you have to break those bounds and those locks they have on your thinking of making these distinctions between good and bad in order to get to some kind of absolute that's beyond good and evil. And I guess I could tie that in with Nietzsche, but I'll just leave it there.
You know, I heard for a couple of years I went to a workshop each weekend that was taught by a Theravada Buddhist, a Burmese. Well, he was not Burmese; he was American. He's part of a Burmese Buddhist community south of Austin, and he used to be a Zen priest. He was actually one of the founders of Austin Zen Center, but then he jumped ship and went to this Theravada tradition. And he made the claim that there's a danger in Western Zen of having no ethical foundation, and he thinks the reason that Zen did not carry that forward was because when Buddhism moved from India into China and became Chan and then got picked up as Zen, that Chan Buddhism actually adopted the cultural moral framework of China that was already embedded into the culture through Confucianism and things of that sort. And so that there was this moral structure, social structure, that was implicit in the practice of Chan. And then I don't know how that, what he thought happened when it went to Japan, maybe something similar. But then when it gets transmitted into the West, you get the sort of esoteric Zen tradition, but having been divorced from these sort of cultural, ethical norms that it originally grew up in. And so he was concerned because he says, if you look at like Theravada Buddhism, the way he talked about it, he had never studied virtue ethics, but it sounds an awful lot like virtue ethics. Theravada ethics did. But you don't find that at least that I'm aware of, in Zen Buddhism. So, I did hear a priest try to make a connection between the experience of emptiness and the experience of universal compassion, but it seems to be true. You don't hear a lot of that kind of talk in the Zen. And like you said, I remember hearing about stories of samurai warriors walking. I may have mentioned this before in another seminar, but walking out of a village they had just, where they just killed a bunch of people because they were hired guns for warlords. And so, they had to attack this village from this other warlord, and walking out and having this tremendous aesthetic experience in hearing the cries of the women and children, because the men had been slaughtered in the village. And so rather than it being a moral experience, it was an aesthetic experience, that they could have this, this sort of appreciation. So I don't know. So yeah, maybe there is a issue there.
I like the idea of that.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I like the idea of the aesthetic aspect of inhumane activities. It's interesting to me. But so since I wrote a bunch of stuff down while Hunter was talking, I'm just gonna randomly address some of those things in a semi-comic fashion. So agape. I had an ex-girlfriend who had agape tattooed on her ribs, and that was interesting. She wasn't very lovingly kind or anything, but tattoo looked good though. So about seriousness. So I think we're thinking of two different ideas about this idea of seriousness, or taking it seriously these people are doing. So I think the way that you're using it is a way of where the people are saying, don't take this personally. I'm not doing this. I'm just fulfilling a role. I'm just going, just go along with this, but I didn't do it. Don't take it seriously in that fashion, And then so the way that I'm thinking of it is almost the exact opposite, where it's basically that person, by saying that, don't take it personally. I'm just, this lowly person in this hierarchy. That's them playing the role that I think ultimately that's the thing that's what would not be taken seriously ultimately if someone were to see the kind of performative aspect of all of this. That ultimately, by them doing, carrying out what they're carrying out, that in fact is their role, and they have to go along with that. So even though they're saying like, oh yeah, we're just these lowly people, the fact that they're actually carrying out these things shows that they're going along with it. In the same way, Kay is going along with it as well by, like at the very beginning, I think it's like the second page or something. It's basically like when that person comes in his room and he makes some kind of statement that he realizes, oh, this implies that he actually has a right already to be here by me saying that. I shouldn't have said that. I think it's that kind of thing of kind of he has to go along with this to some degree. And there could be a way of actually not playing along with this whole performance and everything. And that's the kind of not taking it seriously that I'm referring to, versus like the playing of a role where they're like, oh, don't take it personally. I'm just doing this thing, but, I'm just a middleman. Diffused responsibility kind of thing. And then I could go into the whole totalitarian power versus dispersed power thing, but I'm not going to do that.
Well, so I was gonna jump in with several things. I've kind of been sitting here like jumping to speak, if that's all right. So I have a few things that I liked a lot of what Hunter said, and I liked particularly the point that Nevitt brought up about virtue ethics is a little bit interesting to me, because one of the things that I was thinking about a lot specifically was care ethics, and the way that I think it flows nicely into some of the things I said earlier, and has commentary on some of the things that y'all were talking about. Part of what I would critique about universal love, like in general, whether we're talking about that in terms of the Christian conception, an egalitarian conception, a Buddhist conception, is that that type of love does not seem to prompt any form of action. It doesn't seem to actually initiate care about anything in particular. When we're talking about being ethical and what it would mean to like actually be drawn into regards to somebody else and like have some sort of effect on them, it means that I have to act towards them in particular kinds of ways, and presumably I act towards them in those particular kinds of ways on the basis of a specific desire, emotion, thought, something that I have. And what is happening over and over again in, I think, the Kafka story that you also see, sort of external to that in terms of how other people react, is that, well, they express this sort of universal love in the sense that they go, oh, yeah, that situation sucks, and I sort of agree with you, but they don't ever regard it as a matter to be addressed. And they don't regard it as a matter of to be addressed because, well, they experience a identification with the experience he's having, and an agreement with him about his specific circumstances. But those emotions don't draw them closer to him in any way that would lead them to action. It doesn't actually trigger or like push them towards like a particular type of thing. And the way that maybe gets drawn up into a discussion about so if we're talking about the way that Zen Buddhists were happy to participate in the violent, or happy, but they participated in the violence of the Japanese Empire during World War II. And like, I guess some of the examples of that I'm used to is like Zen Buddhist justifications of suicide attacks by the use of planes, right? You see similar things with the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka, right? There's a whole civil war going on there, which has involved a Buddhist minority using things like like suicide bombings to attack a Hindu majority, right? And the whole kind of complicated conversation you can have about that. One critique that I've seen of a lot of these types of universalizing ideologies, so Buddhism, Stoicism, Christianity, some of these different sort of religious practices, is that they are very good ideologies for the functionaries of an empire, right? So if we use the example of Stoics, you notice that Stoics ended up in a lot of positions of significant authority in the Roman Empire, right? They ended up as emperors, but also like cogs in the machine, right? Generals or administrators or people like that. Why was it that they were able to fulfill this, despite the fact that many of them weren't interested in the glory of conquest, or in some of the more like sort of pagan ideas that maybe led to the initial conquests that brought the empire forward? Well, they were able to act as these functionaries precisely because in many cases they did better than maybe some of their sort of pagan non-Stoic colleagues, specifically because they didn't have so much concern about themselves and their personal well-being. They didn't have so much concern about maintaining the specific presence and authority of their family and that kind of prestige. They said, I am an ethical actor, and what that means is that I need to fulfill my duty in this overarching structure that is the Roman Empire. And any kind of ideology that says that, okay, well, there's this universalizing thing that I need to pay attention to. So universal love in the case of Buddhism, and in terms of Christianity, right, in terms of agape, but also like just sort of Stoic determination to distance yourself from the specifics of your circumstances in your life, don't lead you to things like questioning the system or asking whether these people should be better governed by themselves, or I think the most interesting example of this in terms of Buddhism is Ahsoka converting to Buddhism after his conquest of India. What does he do? He's this horrific conqueror who murders tons of people, and then he like looks at that situation and he says, "Oh man, I wish this was kind of bloody. This was kind of awful. I feel bad about like murdering all of these people." And he converts to Buddhism, but that doesn't lead him to like dismantle his empire or to do away with the structures that lead to that empire in the first place. It just makes him administer the empire in a way that's less destructive, which actually allows the empire to function better because it collects more taxes, and it has an ideology that allows it to request and really demand submission from people on the basis of their submission to an authority, despite the fact that that authority might be immoral at certain moments, because of course there's immorality, right? If we're talking about this in Christianity, of course there's sin, right? Or if we're talking about this in terms of Buddhism, of course there's attachment, right? But it's you have to push yourself away from that attachment in order for the functions of the empire to continue to actually find any kind of like peace in a particular kind of situation. So right, if I'm tying this back around to the specifics of the sort of the trial, in order for anything to happen in the story that would be beneficial to Kay, like somebody would have to actually care enough about something and about his specific situation to do something about it. And the only person who seems to care enough about his specific situation is him. And all of the ways that he goes about pursuing that, right, his pursuit of his feelings about his specific situation, they don't benefit him in any way. And part of that's because however highly regarded he is amongst other people, they aren't willing to step out of the routine that they exist in order to do something for him. And then part of that is also the way that he sort of his self-aggrandized sense of importance keeps presenting him itself, keeps making him look bad in the eyes of a universalizing system. That system keeps saying to him, hey, you think you're hot shit, you won't shut up during this hearing where we're trying to investigate whether you did some sort of wrongdoing. You keep trying to talk to people that aren't part of the system. You keep trying to intervene external to the logic of the system. Well, that just makes you even more guilty, right? The fact that you keep trying to exit it, the fact that you keep trying to pursue your own individual goals, well, that just means that, whether or not you're guilty, you obviously don't have any respect for the system as it functions, which is itself a form of guilt. So that would be my rant and sort of my response to some of the things Hunter said. I think you're on the right track, like at least in terms of my reading of the situation and in terms of my critiques of some of those things. But I would encourage kind of general suspicion about universality and even if we want to accept universality, egalitarianism in particular, it seems to me, can equally act as a system like Buddhism, like Christianity, like Stoicism, to enact the same kind of logic.
Yeah, I like that critique of universality there, and I think definitely in the sense. So I wonder how much our idea of universal love in Buddhism is really colored, to put it lightly, I guess, by our notions of universal from Christianity, and especially because I think a lot of the Buddhism that we would get here in the West is colored also by that same application of universal love in Christianity to, universal love in Buddhism, because I think I think that the problem is basically there's like different levels of abstractness going on there, and I definitely agree, and I think this is pretty much what Nietzsche was saying, in the sense that universal love of is just that's universal, and if it excludes the particular, then is it love of anything at all? It's the same way that you can see this, I think, especially in a lot of Christianity, where you have like fundamentalists be like, well, I hate the sin of this or that. I hate the sin of homosexuality, but I love the sinner. I love everyone. I love you, sinner, but I hate your sin. And in the end, it's a way of basically never really actually loving someone for their particularity. It's always a kind of abstract notion of the individual that they're loving, and never actually any particular people who are all sinners. And therefore you need to really actually love the sin in order to love the sinner. But I wonder, so in Buddhism, I think there is a way, though, that they are engaged in this thing, not as an abstract idea of belief, like so much of Western religion is based off, but it's really a kind of practice, a kind of like comportment towards the world. And I think there's a lot of Buddhists that would be very aware of basically the problem of having that be an abstract idea, and they would want to have it be a kind of really engaged, embodied practice in their life, and a kind of openness that's not mediated by ideas. And I think there's definitely a kind of realm for that. But yeah, I definitely see what you guys are saying about the way that it can be abused, and I think a lot of look at how these secular forms of Buddhism have been used in our own society, like the popularity of mindfulness. I think something like that is basically there's a lot of like corporate training where these people are horribly like miserable, they're overworked. I'll just give them mindfulness training so that they're not stressed out, so that they can work more and increase their productivity. It's a kind of it's almost like Brave New World kind of thing, where these people, by the objective conditions of what's going on, should be miserable, but let's just give them this soma and they'll feel okay and not really care about the actual situation. I think there is somewhat of a case to be made, exactly. At least it exposes the kind of intentions, I think, that it's essentially profitable to give your employees mindfulness training. And I think that is quite interesting. I don't think that means like meditation is unethical or whatever, but it shows how even things that are not necessarily inherently quote unquote bad can be used actually in bad ways, even if I'm sure a lot of those people actually really did improve their lives based off that, but whatever. I guess the other thing I would say is So I took a class on Buddhism, and it basically makes me like. So I've actually been totally not following this at all. So I'm a total hypocrite, but it made me realize how extremely pluralistic Buddhism is, where you almost can't even refer to Buddhism as being just like one thing, and just like I'm doing right now. And yeah, so that's one thing to keep in mind, because, but I think that's interesting, what Sean was saying about, these certain kinds of religions tend to have an idea of, or a way of kind of getting people to go along with things that are not really, I guess, what we'd consider highly ethical. Why is that? I guess you could consider it like a kind of aspect towards the universal, but I'm not sure really, but because I think you probably have some kind of aspect like that in almost every religion. And in a lot of ways, religions, when they come into a different society, they're going to have to change and kind of adapt to the prevailing values and structures of that society. So you see that in Buddhism in pretty much every country. It didn't exactly like demolish what was there and just say, here's Buddhism. It basically had to make the case of Buddhism to whatever was already there. And then if they could be like, okay, I think we can have these like kind of synthesized into something, then it would be successful. But a lot of those Christianity, Buddhism, Stoicism, those are definitely kind of universal in the sense that they're stripped for export. And I've heard it described, I think it was Alan Watts who said this, that Buddhism is kind of like Hinduism, stripped of all of its cultural particulars for export. So Hinduism is, you have to basically either live in India or be raised in India in order to really be a Hindu. Of course, Western hippies and whatnot have tried very hard, but ultimately it's tied to the land of India in the same way like Shintoism is tied to the land of Japan. And these other religions, though, they're stripped for export in a way. Christianity especially. I wouldn't say it's necessarily like Judaism stripped for export. I don't think that's correct at all, but perhaps that's one of the traits there that kind of binds those together.
I mean,
Yeah.
I think Nietzsche would almost like literally say something like that. To be fair, arguably Nietzsche is wrong about that, but I think there's like a similar enough, like different, or Buddhism and Hinduism, as I understand it, are different enough that the analogy would make sense to also say that Christianity and Judaism have a similar sort of relationship.
Yeah, I agree with that.